Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and today we're going to be working on some Cotoneaster bonsai, and I'm going to be going over some pruning and shaping ideas that you can apply to this species in order to develop them into great bonsai. Alright, so these are the trees that we're going to be working on in this video today, and as you can see we've got 4 different Cotoneasters, all at different stages of development and different styles of bonsai, and we did work on these trees in a previous video, so if you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link to it in the description of this video if you'd like to check it out after this video. But last year we came in, give these trees a good prune, and now they have grown quite a lot since then. And also since that video I've got quite a lot of comments and messages from you guys telling me about how much you really love the Cotoneaster as a species for bonsai, and I can totally see why. They're really versatile for bonsai in terms of the shapes and styles of bonsai you can create with them, and they're also super tough if you're new to bonsai. Again, this is a fantastic species to get started with, and I really love the tiny leaves that they do produce. This one has slightly larger leaves on it, but this one over here, this is a Cotoneaster horizontalis, and this has even smaller leaves. So depending on the variety that you do get, some with the really tiny leaves could even be suited to mame style bonsai. Anyways, let's work on this tree first. And just before we start, the tools that I will be using in this video today are some scissors, branch cutters, a grafting knife, some concave branch cutters, tweezers, a bent fork, a nylon brush, and some gin pliers. And as always, by no means do you need these specialized tools. Specialized tools like this in bonsai simply help us do certain tasks easier, but you can get by with an ordinary pair of garden scissors like these, or a pair of garden secateurs if you have them. Just make sure that whatever tool that you do use is clean and sharp, as clean cuts heal a lot faster than cuts that have been sort of squashed by a blunt tool. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove any moss, or what's known as liverwort, growing on the top of the soil here, and it grows in conditions where the soil is quite moist. So if you see this in your bonsai trees, that's a good sign that your soil is a little bit too wet. So maybe water your tree less often or get it into a more free draining soil mix. I'm just spinning the tree around and pulling out any weeds. And here I can see some moss growing up the trunk. For that we take the nylon brush and just give the trunk a scrub. It's really important that you don't let moss creep up the trunk on a bonsai tree, because more often than not, moss actually growing up the trunk will provide too much moisture in that area. It can sometimes rot the trunk, so it's good to stay on top of the moss. Now, just looking at this tree as I examine the trunk and how much growth the tree has put on, it has put on a little bit of growth since I last worked on it, but if I'm being honest, it hasn't put on as much growth as I would have liked. And you may notice this with your own trees. After you prune it, 1 year later, the tree has grown only a little bit. Some of this could be down to fertilization, your watering schedule, but in this case, with this Cotoneaster, I mainly believe it's down to the size of the pot that it's in. In general, with bonsai, the bigger the pot they're in, the quicker the foliage, and the more foliage on the top of the tree will push out. Because this is in a relatively small little pot, the roots in it don't have room to expand. Therefore, the tree is only pushing out a little bit of growth. So what I'm going to do right now is plop this right into a bigger pot with some nice fresh aerated soil in order to get the health of this tree really high and to get it pushing out tons of growth. But then later in the future, as a bonsai becomes more refined and you want the growth to slow down, as you don't want it to put out any more long branches, then we can take it and downsize it from a big pot back into something like this. So let's just take this out and have a little peek at the roots and see what kind of condition they're in. The soil seems too wet for this tree, so that's another problem this tree was having, and that was quite evident with the liverwort growing on the top. As it isn't the right time of year to repot Cotoneaster, the best time to do that is in spring. I'm not going to be giving this tree a full repot today, but for the sake of the tree's health, I am going to give it a slip pot and loosen up some of the old soil. So I'm just taking the tweezers here on the top layer of soil and gently raking it out. All I'm doing is loosening some of the old soil up. And I know Cotoneasters are quite tough in terms of things you can do to them, so a slip pot shouldn't give this tree any problems. I'm just going to tease the edge of this root ball just to loosen up the soil a little bit, getting rid of the shape of the pot that it was in. And as this is now, it's ready for the slip pot. So this is the pot that we're going to be using to up pot the Cotoneaster, just your average black flower pot. It's really important that whatever flower pot that you do use has drainage holes on the bottom. That way the tree isn't sitting in water and gets flooded when you water it. Now, to ensure my substrate doesn't fall out of the bottom of the pot, I've got these little pieces of bonsai mesh, and then with a little bit of scrap wire, making a U shape. And then we put it through the mesh, making sure that the flat side is on the bottom here. And then with this, we go into the pot and put it through one of the holes. And that allows us to wire it on the other side so that it doesn't fall out. And the soil that I'll be using in this video today is just my standard bonsai soil mix of pumice, akadama, and lava rock. Now that I have this quite filled with some soil, I'm going to see how deep the tree will sit when it's in the pot. And I think the height we have it at is perfect for this. So I can just put the tree in and fill around the edges with more soil. And then you can take a chopstick and work out any air gaps that maybe around here. And it's really important that you do remove any air gaps around there, as when you water the tree and the water travels down, anywhere that there's a gap of air, the water essentially won't reach that area. And then as a result, the roots in that area won't grow. Now let's look at the top of the tree and see if we can improve the structure of it. And right away, there is a glaring problem with this tree that I can see, which I can correct pretty much right away. Here at this point, I can see there's two branches coming from the one spot. And when you have two branches growing like this in bonsai, where they're right together, you can get this problem, which is known as inverse taper. An inverse taper is essentially the swelling of the trunk or a branch in a certain area when there's too many branches coming from the one spot. There's no inverse taper at the moment, but if I were to leave these two branches to grow, this part of the tree would swell out like that. And it's not really the goal with bonsai to have inverse taper. You would like a nice tapering tree that goes from thick to thinner to thinnest the whole way up the trunk. So to correct this error, I'm simply going to remove one of these branches. And for me, I'm going to keep the bottom one because this one is a lot longer and more developed. So for that reason, I'm going to remove the top one. Around the back of this tree, there is quite a problem branch also, which is this one growing out the back here. If I remove these leaves, you can see how that branch really is growing in the wrong spot. It's growing on the inside of a bend. And again, if I leave this branch any longer in this area, we'll get that inverse taper, which we don't want. So I'm going to remove that one because the line of the tree is really here where it goes from thick to thinner. When I did cut it here, I covered it in cut paste. And I have found with cut paste, the cuts don't heal quite as fast as when you cover them with cut putty. The putty seems to be softer and it isn't as restrictive on the callus tissue that rolls over and heals it. Also, the cut putty, it has all these different things in it that encourage better healing. So I'm going to recut this cut here and see if I can get it to blend more seamlessly from the trunk into the branches. So for that, I'm just taking some branch cutters and cutting it at an angle. So when I turn this tree on the side now, you can see the taper flows a little bit more smoothly. On the bottom of this cut, you can see it's a little bit brown. And if I don't expose some live tissue at the bottom of here, the tree won't heal over in that area. So I want all of it to show this live green fleshy color the whole way around the cut. So I'm just gonna take these and cut even more. It may look quite drastic now, but it will heal a lot better if you give it a cleaner cut. And I can see here, the tree may be dead down one side. If I keep going with this and see, it looks like it may be. So there might be a live vein running up one side of this tree. I've managed to find some live tissue here further down. Now I'm just switching to some of these concave branch cutters that cut and take a bite out of the tree. So I've managed to get away as much of the rotting wood as I possibly can. It seems that one half of this tree was dying for whatever reason. It could have been due to too much moisture in the pot, but I am going to give this tree the best chance of surviving. And even if one half of it remains dead like this, it could turn into quite a nice feature of the tree, as it does have quite a lot of interest to it. But for now, I'm just going to cover all of this up in some cut putty and hope that this tree heals over in the next couple of years. A really good thing about this cut putty is that it's antibacterial and antifungal, so it should prevent any more rotting from happening and encourage healing on the tree. Alright, and that's how it looks after all the putty's put on it. I didn't think that I would do so much to this tree today, but if it survives, it will look really interesting. Let's move on to the next tree. So with this next tree, as you can see already, this tree has got the beautiful Cotoneaster berries that it keeps on it throughout the whole winter. And I just think they look really spectacular. As a bonsai, it kind of makes it look like there's little tiny apples all over it. And in the springtime, the Cotoneaster has lots of beautiful white flowers. And all I'm going to do to this tree today is simply prune it back to the first 2 sets of leaves on all of the branches. And by doing this, this encourages each branch to subdivide into 2, sending out more side shoots. And as a result, the canopy on top gets more and more dense year after year. So let me just look at this one. It's getting quite long, so I'm going to reduce that back to here. This one is growing straight down. Let me just cut that here. Around this side, this one's quite long, so I know already I'll have to reduce this one. Let me cut that to here. I don't quite think that this little branch halfway up the trunk is working with it, so I'm going to remove it. I'm pretty happy with how this tree is developing so far. It's got a nice bushiness on the top, which I will continue to develop over the next couple of years. But if you look at what this tree looked at last year, it was growing kind of out of control and we had to give it a first styling. But now this tree is starting to come into shape. I'd like to develop it and have the canopy come out maybe this far. But before I can get it to this stage, it's going to take a lot of pruning back hard, letting it grow, pruning back hard, letting it grow over and over, until the branches look a lot more natural. They have all that movement coming out to that distance we want them at. Let's leave it at that for today. I want to enjoy the berries over winter. With this next tree, I will have this as the front of the tree. And to see the front, I'm just going to remove any branches growing straight towards you. And it is quite congested as it gets to this top part here. So I'm going to remove some branches I think really don't work in the design. And some of the decision making in bonsai does come down to your own preferences of how you like things to look. Sometimes your own intuition of what looks nice to you. So starting with this bottom branch here, I quite like how this comes off to the side. I think it would make a great first branch of the tree, although it is causing quite a bit of inverse taper around the other side here. You can see the inverse taper as it swells out from that area. So I am going to have to remove this branch. On one hand, it was helping heal this cut over, but on the other hand, it was creating inverse taper, which I really don't want. So I'm just going to cut that down, get rid of that taper. With my grafting knife, you can take any knife. I'm just going to clean up the edge of this cut. And again, I'm just going to seal this up with some cut putty, just like we did with the other tree. But this tree is looking so much healthier. And I think I do much prefer cut putty over cut paste. The trees just seem to heal so much nicer with a cut putty. Now for the top of this tree, I would like to somehow make it work, but right in here, there is unfortunately a nasty wire scar. And I don't think it will ever grow out. It just looks too strange. I also think the top part of this tree has quite a lot of the same thickness right up until it gets to this point. So I think cutting it back to here could be a benefit anyways, as it will create a lot stronger taper. Yeah, that looks much better. Let me just cut the end of this. I know this tree will put on lots of growth next year, but for now we have reduced it quite a bit. And I am really liking where it's going. Imagine this as the front. This could also be a potential front when this wound heals. And now onto this final tree, which we were going to work on last year, but the tree didn't have enough growth on it. So I decided to leave it an extra year just to get healthy and grow before we work on it for the first time. And this is a beautiful Cotoneaster horizontalis. The pot it's in is cracked, as you can see here. So I'm just going to get that out of there. It has got lots of healthy roots. Not going to disturb the soil too much today. There are just some weeds on the top I'd like to get rid of. And this, what is that? I believe there is a cutting of some sort of apple tree growing inside the pot along with it. This is it here. As far as I can remember, this was a cutting off of my Nagasaki crabapple. I just potted that up into this little plastic flower pot so that it can continue to grow and thrive in its own soil. Now when it comes to this tree in terms of bonsai design, there's many options and different approaches that we could do with this tree in order to make it a bonsai. And the small leaf profile on the tree does lend itself to having this tree as a small tree. And because this tree is quite tall, one option could be to air layer this tree next year into 2 small separate trees. Another option could be to figure out a branch structure on the tree and create your classic bonsai from that. It's really interesting to me how all of the branches are growing at downward angles, and that's naturally growing like this. I didn't wire any of these branches. Let's get rid of this branch. That way we can see the trunk line here. This branch, these lower ones won't be needed. Just giving this a rough cut just to see what's going on. I don't expect this tree to look anywhere near good by the end of this styling, but it will set it up to grow into a nice shape next year. The more I look at it, the more I can't see anything unique with this tree. So there is a couple of ideas and approaches that we could take to this tree to make it unique by itself. The trunk line's the same thickness the whole way up, which I really don't like. I would like this tree to have some sort of taper, but because it doesn't have that, I am going to do something rather unconventional as an experiment on this tree to see how it gets on. First, let's remove all this top growth. I'm going to take the branch cutters and prune this to here. You could air layer this top off if you wish to, but for what I plan to do with this tree, I don't want the top on it here. I'm going to take this nylon brush and just brush off all this moss. This moss has made its way quite far up the trunk. I think this might have been on here since last year. Doesn't seem to have done much harm as the moss is dry. And you can already see, just from taking off the top of this tree, it's already starting to look like a bonsai. And from this point, if you wish to, you could wire the branches into place. Take this top one, point it up, allow it to become the new leader. I'm gonna go about splitting this tree right down the middle. Now I don't have a trunk splitter on me at the moment, so I'm going to find a different way of splitting this tree in half. I suppose you could do this with an axe and gently tap it into the top of the tree, but I'm just going to take my grafting knife, place it on top like this, and take the gin pliers and just tap gently. And we're getting a nice split down the trunk. I think by doing it this way, you have a lot more control over the split as you go down the tree. And of course, if you have a nice expensive grafting knife, do not do this with it because you may damage your knife. This is a really cheap grafting knife, so I don't mind if I dent the other end of it here. Ah, we're getting there now. So we're a good bit down the tree now, and I'm just going to make sure these branches here aren't in my way. And I do want this to be the front, so it makes sense not to have any branches there. Let me just reposition the knife, make it more central. All right, let's keep going. Really take your time with this if you're splitting a tree because you want a really controlled split. And if you rush it, you could end up stripping one half of it off and you wouldn't have that nice split that we're looking to get from the very top to the bottom. So I'm pretty happy with how far I have taken the knife down the tree. The fact that we've split it that way vertically means the sap will still flow up each side of the tree and each side will continue to live no problem. You may see this and initially think, oh my God, you killed the tree, you split it right down the middle, but I can assure you each half of this tree will continue to live no problem. It's only if you were to take the bark off of the tree in a ring around this way then it could kill the tree, as the sap can no longer flow from the bottom to all of the top of the tree. If you wish to, at this point, you can continue to split it right down the middle and separate each half into 2 different trees and have them as their own independent bonsai. But for me, I would like to keep these together, but keep them remained open like this and see how the tree develops over time. So to keep these open and apart like this, I'm just going to use a chopstick. Let me just first take out the knife. I've just pushed the chopstick into that gap, and that will ensure these 2 pieces of the tree stay apart for a long enough time where eventually we won't even need the chopstick to be in this place. Let me just trim the chopstick, that way it's not in the way. I may come back and wire this tree next year, but I feel like splitting it right down the middle was enough stress for the tree for today. I'm gonna put this tree back into a brand new plastic flower pot, one that isn't cracked. And then we can come back next spring and give this a repot into some nice fresh bonsai soil. I think by splitting a tree like this is not only a really good example of how experimentation in any art can lead to some really creative designs, but it also helps in the learning process. And if you have relatively cheap material, you really shouldn't be afraid of killing a tree. I've killed many a tree in my bonsai journey so far, and I know I will kill a lot more trees in the future, but it is how we learn. There's nothing wrong with trying new things. Just because something may be unconventional doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. If you have an idea and it makes sense in your head, why not try it and see if it works? I would also like to show off the Cotoneaster that we worked on in a different video. This is the exposed root style Cotoneaster. I'm really happy with how this one came out also. You may also be wondering, is it possible to take cuttings from Cotoneaster? And my answer to that is yes, absolutely. They root so easily from cuttings. You can take either a nodal cutting or a heel cutting. A heel cutting is when you take the branch and you break it off of another branch like this. The little end that you get on here is known as a heel. You want to take that, cut it off with some scissors, dip it into soil, and it should root. If you wish to, of course, you can use some rooting hormone, but with Cotoneasters, I found you really don't have to. And then to take a nodal cutting, you want to cut just below some leaves. Strip off all the bottom leaves, about half of the cutting, stick this into soil, and it should root. And again, you want to plant it half as deep as the cutting is long, and that will ensure a better success rate. And as a bonus part of this video, I would like to show you some Cotoneaster cuttings that I rooted from earlier in the year. And this really just shows how easy it is to propagate these from cuttings. In this tray is a mix of some Lonicera or Hagean honeysuckle, and these ones here are Cotoneaster. Now of course not every single cutting will root like this one here, but the majority of them, these have rooted. I can see there's lots of healthy roots here. We have a mame bonsai ready to go. And the soil that I use to root these in is some Ericaceous compost and Akadama. But I may come back to these maybe next year and make some mame bonsai with them. And on that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like in this video. It really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And please let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Is there anything you would have done differently to any of these trees? Perhaps you wouldn't have split the Cotoneaster I split. I'm always open to new and different ideas in bonsai. If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel and to help me continue making videos, hit the thanks button down below. And if you would like to stay updated on all the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's @NotionBonsai, and you'll be able to see all the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.